Okay, we are now live on YouTube. Good evening, everybody. I'm glad you could join us. I was going to offer you the opportunity to spend 15 minutes making a cup of tea because we were expecting Rabbi Sarna to join us in 15 minutes. I'm delighted to say that he is here with us now. Though he is obviously the chief rabbi of the UAE, he's actually in New York at the moment. So a well-travelled man. I will pass over to David Oliver now to introduce him. Just to say two things, if you have any questions, if you would like to either raise your virtual hand through the participants method, you should find in the top right of your icon or your picture an opportunity to raise your virtual hand to ask a question. If you don't feel comfortable speaking or doing so, you can enter a question in the chat room, and we look forward to your questions through the evening. I will now pass over to David Oliver.
Okay, good evening, everybody. David missed out a couple of things. I think he said it's the top right box. It's in the bottom right-hand box for the participants. This is if you want to talk to anyone, or you can go into the chat box, write something into the chat box. But don't wave your hand because we may not see you because we don't see anybody and we may not be able to pick you up. So good evening again. Chief Rabbi Yehuda Sarna is the Executive Director of the Bronfman Center at New York University and the University Chaplain. He teaches on the faculty of the Wagner School for Public Service and is a senior fellow of Many Institute for Multi-Faith Leadership at NYU. In 2019, he was appointed as the inaugural Chief Rabbi in the United Arab Emirates, which is what he's here for. So please let me over to Chief Rabbi Yehuda Sarna.
Well, it is a great honor to be with you tonight. And David squared, thank you for the wonderful introduction to your congregation. I've never been, unfortunately, to your congregation, not yet. I've never really been outside of the Heathrow Airport. And so one of these days, if you'll have me, I would love to visit in person. My strongest connection to the UK comes through the rabbis that you've produced. I've been working at New York University for the past 18 years, and I always make a point of hiring a British rabbi when I can. The first I hired was Gideon Black, some of whom you may know, and the second who's working with me now is Joe Wolfson. Joe and Corinne Wolfson are with me. When I hired Rabbi Joe Wolfson, my 9-year-old son said, "Hey, what's going on? Find a British guy, give him some ordination, and stir." In any event, it's a great delight to be here with you this evening. And what I hope to do is to share with you a number of stories which have brought me to this point, which in many ways are not just things that happened to me along the way, but in some way are indicative of the larger story that is in the process of unfolding in the Middle East. And it's something that unless you're there, unless you're closely connected, you might miss. And I hope to, over the course of my remarks, just open up some of these areas. And then I absolutely invite your comments and questions as you may have them. I was born in Montreal, Canada. I grew up in a congregation much like yours, and then I found myself at Yeshiva University in New York City, pursuing a degree in English literature, and then my rabbinic degree. And in 2002, about 1 year, and the 1-year anniversary of September the 11th, I came to New York University, whose campus is just about just 2 or 3 kilometers away from the Ground Zero site. And I could say that I didn't realize at the time the extent to which my time at New York University would be defined by 9/11, the aftermath of 9/11, the aftershocks of 9/11, and kind of everything that came with it. And in my first years at NYU's the largest private university, has thousands of Jewish students. Sometimes it's called NYJew, but large student Jewish community, very vibrant Jewish people of all different kinds. And in my early years, I really spent, my focus was on developing the infrastructure of the Jewish community, the Jewish student community. But in 2006, 2007, things took a bit of a turn. There was a rising anti-Muslim or Islamophobic feeling in New York and actually around the United States. And the campus life was not insulated from that. And although the Jewish student community had a center, it's called the Bronfman Center. For those of you who are familiar with American campus life, it's a Hillel. But there's no such counterpart. There was no such counterpart for Muslim students. And in the face of what appeared to be an Islamophobic event that was being planned on campus, although protected under the principles of freedom of speech, as in the United States, hate speech is also protected speech, as long as you don't incite to to violence. Hate speech is protected speech. And the Muslim students were looking for help. They were looking for help from other faith leaders, more established faith leaders on campus. And I share this with you because it was not only in the shadow of 9/11, but also in the shadow of the Second Intifada, at a time when the kind of political clashes between pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian or anti-Israel, however you want to frame those clashes, but there's certainly heated temperature. And it was within that context that Muslim students reached out to me. They said, Rabbi Sarna, we're looking to shape an interfaith response to this Islamophobic event. Would you help us? And I thought that was so unique. What an opportunity. But also, what would I be getting myself into? Anyway, I consulted with a number of people, and I began to work with the Muslim students to shape their response, their strategy around this event. This was really my first engagement with Muslim people. Now, just about 2 years later, fast forward 2 years, I began working with someone who had recently graduated New York University, became an imam, and was invited to serve as the imam at New York University. And it's an amazing story because it was partially a result of both Jewish students who had come with me to help support the Muslim students, and Muslim students lobbying together to hire an imam. And the imam and I, we subsequently became very good friends. His name is Khalid Latif. We were invited to come to Abu Dhabi, January 2010. Why? New York University, although it's named New York University, is not only a New York University, it has campuses in many cities around the world, but 12 by 2010. It has actually its largest campus is in, one of its largest campuses is in London. There is an NYU London. And there, in 2007, 2008, NYU was looking to expand to the Middle East. One natural choice, of course, was Tel Aviv in Israel. And also NYU was looking for one of the Gulf countries to locate in. And Abu Dhabi presented itself as an option. And in fact, when Abu Dhabi decided to go forward with an NYU campus, it was different in model. It was funded by the government. The effort was to try to create a world honors college where students who, with excellent levels of achievement, could come at virtually full scholarship from many, many different countries. It's not a majority Emirati student body. It's not a majority American student body or UK student body. The students who are coming to NYU Abu Dhabi come from all over the world. And in January of 2010, the school had not yet opened. In fact, in the rush to get it ready on time, there was a prefab academic building that was assembled in Turkey, shipped to Abu Dhabi, and dropped on the old fish market in old Abu Dhabi, and was just plugged into to power and to water. And Khalid and I were invited to come to Abu Dhabi that weekend when students were being flown in from around the world to interview, to gain admission. Now, I'd never been to an Arab country before. And in fact, when I agreed to go, I couldn't even showed you where Abu Dhabi was on a map. And the day before I left, I remember this, I went on to Google Maps and I said, where's this country anyway? And I looked and I see, okay, it's right across the sea from Iran, borders on Saudi Arabia, Oman, very close to Kuwait, Qatar, and I'm thinking Yemen. I'm thinking, what did I get myself into? Now imagine this. So here I am, open-minded campus kind of rabbi, standing up not just against anti-Semitism, but also against Islamophobia. And I'm traveling to an Arab country for the first time. I'm a Canadian citizen. At the time, only a Canadian citizen, and Canadians needed a special visa to enter. So I come to the airport and I go through, I meet with a customs officer one-on-one. And this person full traditional Emirati garb. He looks at my passport. Of course, at that point, my passport had many, many stamps from Israel. My name is Yehuda, which in Hebrew, in English, in Arabic means Jew. I had decided, because I was being invited as the rabbi, I was wearing my yarmulke, I was wearing my tzitzit out as I do wherever I go. And the fellow is flipping through my passport, and he sees the stamps. And then he takes out his stamp, stamps my passport, and he says, here you go. And I take my passport back, and he says, just before you go, can you tell me, where did you get your kafia from? I've never seen that kind of kafia. So I looked at him and I said, I don't know how to break this to you. My name means Jew. I have 24 Israel stamps in my passport. This is not a kafia. It's a kippah. And I got it at J. Levine bookstore in Midtown Manhattan. And he pushed back from the table and he just burst out laughing. Now, I share this story with you because back then in 2010, the ability even of a customs officer to notice and identify that someone who was coming into their country was a Jewish person and not someone wearing an absurdly small kafia was very low. Now, I came into the country and Khalid and I, one of our first stops, I said, can we go to a supermarket? Let me see what they have that's kosher. And we went into a Carrefour, a French supermarket chain. And we were walking up and down the aisles together. And we get to the dairy section. I said, Khalid, I think I need to stop here. I'm going to look at the cheeses, maybe some. So I see Philadelphia cream cheese, which in the United States has an OU symbol, a kosher symbol on it. So I'm looking at the cheeses. And while I'm doing this, he says, you know what, you wait here. I want to go to a different aisle. So he goes to a different aisle. And then it happens. All of a sudden, I feel alone in an Arab country. And a surge of fear comes over me. And I am certain that there, in that moment, in the cheese section in Carrefour, I'm going to become a victim of Arab terror. And that surge of fear comes over me. And then Khalid returns and he says, he sees me, he says, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Listen, I thought I was just it was all gonna come to an end right here in the cheese section of Carrefour, how absurd that would be." But it made me realize that even someone like me, I have a certain stereotype, very deeply set, of who Arabs are, the way that they look at me, and my ability to navigate safely and securely within that space. Now, I was so taken by that weekend in Abu Dhabi, meeting these great students from all over the planet, some of whom had come on an airplane for the first time, some of whom had been in a car on the first time, traveling from a small village off the grid, kerosene lamp off the grid in Africa, traveling by a motorized vehicle for the first time to the larger city, and then on a plane and into this den of skyscrapers. I was so taken by the opportunity of this World Honors College. I said, I got to keep coming back here. And so I did. Since 2010, I've been going back once or twice a year. And all the while when I was there, especially once campus life got started, there were a handful of Jewish students, a handful of Jewish identified faculty members who were there. And I started hosting these Shabbat dinners, very interesting. I had 30, 40 people at Shabbat dinner, half of whom had some kind of Jewish identity. The other half had none, but were very curious, had no Jewish people in their country, had never met a rabbi before, or even thought that they would meet a rabbi. And I saw this as a really unique opportunity to be an openly Jewish person in a space which normally would not allow for public expression of Jewishness. I remember the president of the university, who's a legal scholar, John Sexton, invited me to sit in on a class he was teaching about the boundary between religion and state in the United States legal system. And he said, "You should come to my class." I said, "Okay." I said, "What am I going to do there?" He says, "Just sit there and listen. You'll observe. You'll have a good time." So I sit down in the class, all Emirati students. And he says, "Okay, class, before we get started, we're going to do the case of, whatever it was involving, I think, someone not showing up refusing to show up on Shabbat, losing their job, suing their employer. We have a guest over here. Why don't you introduce yourself?" I say, "Hi, my name is Yehuda Sarna." He says, "That's not enough. You got to tell them what you do." So I say, "I'm a rabbi and I run the Jewish Student Center at NYU in New York." And he says, "That's not enough. You can't just say you're a rabbi. These people have never met a Jewish person in their life. You got to explain to them what Judaism is, because we need it for this case. Go." So I said, "Well, Judaism is the shared belief that my people are descended from freed slaves, and that much in the way that God redeemed us from bondage, we now have an obligation to remember that moment of emancipation, and it obligates us to do the same for others." And he says, "That's not enough. Tell them more." Anyway, long story short, this turned out from being a class on religion and state, to Sarna's version of Judaism in 45 minutes. Now, I share these stories with you from the early days, particularly because the dramatic turn of events over the past number of years, not number of months, but number of years, is something that I believe is very relevant to the way Jewish people around the world should begin to look at the Middle East and should begin to look at the Jewish map of the world. In 2015, I learned that there was a small group of Jewish people in Dubai, not in Abu Dhabi where I was, Dubai, about an hour and a half away, many of whom, some of whom were Brits from the London area. Simon and Sharon Ader, some of you may know. Rana Jacobo, Mia Bellman, they had begun to form a Jewish community with a certain degree of, regular gathering for a minyan, or if someone had a yortzeit or Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah. And I knew what was going on in Abu Dhabi. I didn't know what was going on in Dubai. And by 2015, I'd learned that there was a Shabbat minyan meeting in people's homes every week. And so I got the contact information of the individual, Ross Creel, who was running the show at that time. And I said, I'm coming right before Hanukkah. I'm supposed to be in Abu Dhabi, but I can make the trip over to Dubai. Is it okay if I come? And he said, yeah, why don't you come to my house to give a shiur? I walk into his home, 20 people, each person from a different country, Jewish. And the class was on Hanukkah, and I began to teach about where is the optimal location of the Chanukiah, of the menorah. As the Talmud says, what is the optimal? Outside the door, so everybody could see for Pisum and Isa, or inside the home on the table when one is afraid to place a Jewish symbol outdoors publicly. We read the sources, and it was like touching a raw nerve. All of a sudden, there was a burst of I guess kind of like personal expression, something that people had always wanted to say but never quite found the words. They said, Rabbi, we don't know where to put our menorah. Symbolically, we don't know, because on the one hand, we've come to this country. No one has forced us. We're not refugees from other. We've come to this country by choice because it offers us safety, it offers us security, it offers us prosperity, and it offers us a very high quality of life. And we feel welcome here. And at the same time, we recognize that we're still in an Arab country. We tell our kids when they go to school to keep their Jewish identity a secret. It's our little secret. And so we feel kind of torn. Using that as a baseline, in 2017, I initiated a conference at NYU Abu Dhabi called Religious Tolerance in the UAE. And we invited, together with my kind of academic co-host, we invited the representatives of different faith communities within the UAE, including Mr. Creel. And we paired them with scholars of religion and state who came in from around the world. Small conference, 12 people. And we gathered, we discussed, and each faith leader offered a kind of reflection on the nature of being Jewish or Hindu or Protestant or Catholic or what have you, Eastern Orthodox in the United Arab Emirates. And then the scholars would offer some academic analysis of what exactly was going on. 2018, this small but mighty Jewish community in Dubai undergoes a process of developing a constitution for itself. In the later months of 2018, the Vatican announces that the Pope will make the first ever visit to the Arabian Peninsula, first ever of any Pope, which would occur in the beginning of 2019. And at that moment, the UAE decides that it wanted to not just make a moment out of the Pope's visit, but it wanted to create a theme for the whole year, which would be called the Year of Tolerance. And as part of this effort, it was clear in that moment that the Jewish community could no longer exist in the shadows. And so there was, for example, a book that was published called Celebrating Tolerance, which was edited by Reverend Andy Thompson, who was a great British minister who was serving in the UAE at the time, has since moved back to the UK. And in this book, you had the detail history of each community, each faith community in the United Arab Emirates. This book did not go on some shelf. It was in every single bookstore, right at the front, when they're right next to the latest book by Barack Obama, or Michelle Obama, right there, with a celebrating tolerance, and on the front cover, a matrix, like a Zoom matrix, like I see, like you might see, of faith leaders, including Mr. Kriel wearing a yarmulke and a talit. Not a small kafia, a yarmulke. And then the Pope visits, and the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi announces that in light of the Crown Prince's visit, Abu Dhabi was committed to building a unique complex composed of a mosque building, a church building, and a synagogue building, connected by gardens above ground, each house of worship the same height, and each one facing their own proper orientation. The mosque facing Mecca, the church facing east, sunrise, and the synagogue facing Jerusalem. And that this project needed to be completed in 2.5 years. And at this point, Ross and the rest of the leadership in Dubai said, you know what, we really need a rabbi who reflects the vast diversity of our community, and they asked me to serve in that function. They knew I was, visiting, here and there, and that a lot of work could be done virtually. So they said, hey, why don't you do this? I said, I'd be delighted to, only if it's volunteer. And they said, Rabbi, you drive a tough bargain. But they let me do it as a volunteer. And to my surprise, I came back to New York, and I was asked to speak on a panel for the American launch, the New York launch of the book Celebrating Tolerance. Myself, Reverend Andy, and the panel was moderated by Lana Nusseibeh, the UAE ambassador to the United Nations. And Lana opens the event by saying that her family is originally Palestinian, the Nusseibeh clan. And she says, my family's commitment to religious tolerance goes back not 8 years, not 80 years, but 800 years. You see, my ancestors, 800 years ago, were asked by warring Christian groups to hold the keys to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, because the Christian groups themselves could not make an arrangement. So it's my family that to this day has the keys that unlocks one of the most important holy sites to Christians. So I understand what a commitment to religious tolerance means. So yeah, this conversation, and then after the event, Lana comes right over to me, looks at me straight in the eye as if she was looking right through me. She says, Rabbi, any help you need to build the Jewish community in the UAE, you tell me. My whole staff is at your disposal. So I follow up, I send her an email, and we meet, we get together, we talk a little bit. And then the next week, I receive a phone call from her office inviting me to come to the United Nations. Now, this was not just any invitation. This was an invitation that I could never, even in my wildest dreams, have imagined. I was invited to speak at an event that the UAE was chairing at the United Nations for something called the OIC, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. That's the regional forum for all 56, 57 Muslim majority or Muslim countries. 50th anniversary, so they had a few special guests. They had the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. They had the permanent representative from the Holy See, from the Vatican. And Lana said, we're the UAE, we're hosting the event. We want it to be about religious tolerance. Would you join them at this lunch to speak about what it's like being Jewish in the United Arab Emirates? And I said, well, of course I'd be honored. May 3rd, 2019, I wrote a speech. I actually wrote 2 speeches. I think I may have even wrote 3 speeches. I knew I was going to be walking into a room. The only people in the room having lunch together were 50 odd ambassadors from Muslim majority countries. What rabbi gets an opportunity to address that kind of audience at the United Nations headquarters? I show up in the room and I'm cognizant of the time, and I realized my day was a little pressed because I had, following this lunch, a commemoration that I had to lead for Yom HaShoah, which was on May 3rd, 2019. And I realized that this day is none other than Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I walk over to Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who I'd never met before. I said, Mr. Secretary General, I wrote a speech. Actually, I wrote 2 speeches, but I just realized today is Holocaust Remembrance Day. Do you think I could talk about the Holocaust around this table? And he says, not only can you, you must. So we sit down at the table. It was actually Antonio Guterres' 70th birthday party. So they bring him a special piece of chocolate cake. The Saudi ambassador says to him, Mr. Secretary General, in our tradition, when someone has a birthday, you wish them, you should have health and happiness until 100. Now I see the rabbis here. We'll give you an extra 20 years. Guterres speaks, and then the permanent representative of the Holy See speaks. And then I say, friends, we have an obligation to stand up for each other. May I tell you how my wife's family was saved during the Holocaust? There's a branch of my wife's family which was in Berlin, of all places, during World War II. And their family doctor was a man named Mohammed Helmi, an Egyptian, who was a vocal opponent of the Nazis, like most Muslims in Berlin were. There were about 5,000 Muslims in Berlin. He lost his job at a prominent hospital because of that, and he was allowed to continue his private practice. What he did at the risk of his own life is he hid my wife's aunt, great aunt, in one of his properties. He produced a fake conversion document to Islam and a fake marriage document to one of his cousins in Egypt, so that my wife's great aunt potentially would be eligible for an Egyptian passport so she could leave. She survived the war in part with the disguise of a hijab. Not a kafia, not a yarmulke, a hijab. In fact, Dr. Mohammed Helmi in 2013 was recognized as the first righteous among the Gentiles by Yad Vashem, the first Arab ever recognized by Yad Vashem, and to this day, the only one. And I said, that's my family history. So we have an obligation to stand up for each other. And I also thought about, of course, channeled my early experiences at NYU, which I'd shared with you earlier. We have an obligation. When Lana introduced me, she said, and this was to my amazement, she says, we're so happy to have a new chief rabbi of our country. And I couldn't believe it. I walked out of the UN headquarters that day in New York City, pinching myself. What just happened here? The next week, I get an invitation from the UAE ambassador to Washington, D.C., Yusuf Al-Otaiba. In my mind, he should get a Nobel Peace Prize. Yusuf Al-Otaiba, who played a very critical role in the Abraham Accords. He says, would you like to come to our iftar that we're hosting in Washington? And we'd love to introduce you there. And sure enough, a similar kind of introduction. Boy, oh boy, I had no idea where things were headed. Much of the work leading up to and going through the Abraham Accords are about establishing a vibrant, dynamic Jewish community for its residents. Since the Abraham Accords, Of course, we've welcomed 130,000, probably more at this point, Israeli tourists. During the month of December alone, 70,000. That's roughly 1% of all Jewish Israelis visited, though there may have been a very high percentage of Arab Israelis who visited. Those numbers will not be known, but nevertheless, 70,000 Israelis. Every single hotel lobby in Dubai, you could hear Hebrew being spoken. If you were to walk along the Dubai Creek, you would see Hasidim. If you would go to the Dubai beach, you would see Tel Avivis enjoying the beach. 8 hotels had set aside one of their kitchens to be a kosher kitchen, from the more value caterer to the highest end kosher caterer, flying in their dishes, whether from Europe or from the UK or from Israel, to set up shop to accommodate this huge influx. Now, when I go through customs, there's no, oh, isn't that a nice kafia? Immediately, you get the same thing when you come through. Shalom. If it's nighttime, you'll hear Laila Tov, Erev Tov, or you'll hear Boker Tov. A very clear shift, but it's a shift that began a while ago. Now, many people ask me, where do I think that things are going? So I think what we are observing is nothing short of a creation of a new center of gravity of the Jewish map of the world. Hundreds of thousands of Israeli tourists are going to visit every year. The UAE, whether through the Abrahamic Family House, that complex mosque, church, synagogue that I mentioned to you before, whether through its spiritual resource, its cultural resources, its the interest in tourism, finance, business, entrepreneurship, innovation, science, this is going to become one of those spots in the world that Jewish people are going to come through at least once in their life. I can't even tell you how many Jewish groups from the United States, from New York, have contacted saying, we'd like to come, can you help organize our itinerary? I'm almost near the point where I feel like I should probably get out of the rabbinate and just start a tour company, be able to handle this much better. But that's one thing. Well, the other thing that is developing is not just a change in the kind of the Jewish geographic map, where Jews are going to flock to this Arab country, not be worried that they'll be struck down in the cheese section, right? We're going to flock there. From an American standpoint, you would say it's going to become the Florida of the Jewish world, not that part, a place where people go for for winters or for weekends, etc. Weddings, unbelievable. How many kosher weddings have happened there so far? But it's giving us a new lens to understand the Middle East. The UAE signed on to the Abraham Accords first. Other countries followed. That is not going to be the only thing that the UAE does first, and other Gulf countries are going to follow. The synagogue, which we're building now in Dubai, is going to be called Gates to the East, Sharei Mizrach. The reason we call it Sharei Mizrach is because we really see it as an opening to the East. And there are all kinds of opportunities that we already see emerging. Just a few months ago, we started something called the Association of Gulf Jewish Communities, which links together Jews who are present in each of the 6 GCC countries, whether it's Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, or even Saudi Arabia. We're doing virtual events for them around each of the holidays and also sending them the materials that they need. Okay, I've spoken for long enough. I think it's time to go to the phones, as we say. Perhaps we'll go back to the Davids and we'll take some questions.
David, you take it away.
I'll ask the first question then. I've never considered ever to go to any Arab country. But times are changing, and the figures that you just told me about, I mean, were incredible. So, should I go on holiday there?
Should you go on holiday there?
Yeah, I mean, it would never even cross my mind.
Yeah, of course you should go, but do yourself a favor. Go between November and February. The weather there is beautiful, and you have a wonderful. You can try to go in the summer. I think sometimes it gets up to 50 degrees. So it depends if you have your suntan lotion on, but certainly in the winter, it's a great time to visit. Great time to visit. And one of the reasons why so many people visit is because it's a major airport hub. You know, anytime I travel from New York to the UAE, there about 40% of the flight is Indian. They're flying to Dubai or to Abu Dhabi and then connecting to India. There are people who are flying to South Africa who connect through Dubai or Abu Dhabi, and so on and so forth. I even saw the best deals on Expedia for flights from New York to Israel for Sukkot are through Dubai and Abu Dhabi.
Is it easy to be overtly Jewish in these countries? Is it mostly Dubai, or do you feel safe anywhere now?
Yeah, I mean, Abu Dhabi and Dubai, I feel completely safe. I've never visited, frankly, the other 5 Emirates. There's 5 other Emirates I haven't visited, but it's a very safe country, very, very safe country. If you ask people who've lived there and you ask them, well, did you ever experience any anti-Semitism? Look, anywhere that we've prayed, any synagogue, any hotel that's hosting large number of visitors, there's never been a need of like hiring a private security company. It's a very, very safe country.
The Abraham Accords obviously were with the UAE, but that led to an agreement with Bahrain. Are they building shores in a shore in Bahrain? Are there the same similar happenings happening there?
A good question. Bahrain already had an established interfaith organization under a center under the auspices of King Hamad, and there is actually a historic Jewish community that's in Bahrain, dating back 150, 180 years, and the synagogue there has just completed a renovation and restoration project.
And how do you believe that things will continue to improve in the Middle East with the widening of other agreements under Joe Biden, or would they more than likely have been better under Donald Trump? Is there a shift at all, bearing in mind how Biden looks at Iran as well? And I know that there's obviously, it's not necessarily stable all the time in that region.
Yeah, I think that what we're going to see, my prediction is not necessarily a widening, but a deepening. So I think, like, even in the UAE, what percentage of Emiratis are over the moon exuberant about the Accords? I think there were some who were exuberant, you know, maybe at 10% on one side, very excited, very happy. Then you had probably 10% all the way on the other side. But 80% in the middle really have adopted a wait and see attitude. So I think it's gonna take some time for this to settle in. Of course, acceptance of Judaism, that's long been accepted. Acceptance of Israel, that's a different story. And I think what's occurring is there's the process. Some people call it normalization. Maybe that's technically correct, but what I would say is more importantly, it's a de-fetishization of Israel. Israel had been seen as having a particular toxicity, and you know, you talk to people in the diplomatic corps, they'll say very simply, they say, look, we have relations with many countries that we don't agree with everything that they do. So why should Israel be so much different? We believe that should not be any more settlement activity. We believe that it should move quickly to establish a Palestinian state. But they're running their country, we're running our country. We have difference of opinion. Do we like everything the United States does? Do we like everything Russia does? Do we like everything the UK does? No, but we're not running those countries. We're running our own country. So there's a defect, that kind of like pragmatic thinking, instead of the kind of magical thinking that some radicals have introduced into Islamic narratives, but there's somehow being something demonic about the state of Israel, somehow representing much darker, larger forces than what it is. The Abraham Accords are puncturing that. What I imagine that we'll see is the deepening of the Abraham Accords into that 80%, and the softening of the positions of the 10%. I think we'll see that before we see any other countries join. The reason I say that is because that window of opportunity for countries like Morocco, Sudan, etc., who wanted something from the United States in a kind of very transactional way, that they knew that they had that window, and they didn't go for it. So I think just like there's the 80% that have adopted a wait and see approach, I think the same is true of other countries. Wait and see.
I've just got a quick question, and then we've got a few hands up. So my quick question, did any Arab countries celebrate Yom HaTzmaut overtly?
There were parties, in Dubai, but I don't know the extent to which they were very public. What I will tell you is that Yom HaShoah was commemorated very publicly. I know because I was there. I was at a museum called the Crossroads of Civilizations Museum, where we held the first in-person Yom HaShoah event. And it wasn't just an event, it was actually the launch of a Holocaust exhibition in the Crossroads of Civilizations Museum. I'm very grateful to be allowed to help conceptualize that exhibition. It includes a section that's dedicated to people like Mohammed Helmy. He's not the only one, Dr. Helmy. Other Arab upstanders who risked their lives, their standings, their livelihood to stand up against the Nazis. And we had a very powerful ceremony. So I think we will see more of that. Okay, maybe I can take some of the other questions here. I see Jackie.
Yeah. David, can you?
Yeah, Helen Berkman was the first up here, but let's go to her. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Oh, hi, Rabbi. My daughter's been living in Dubai for 7 years. And I just want to say that my grandson's going to be bar mitzvahed there in October.
Beautiful.
So, yeah. So he's now learning his bar mitzvah through Zoom. And also my husband, Stanley's been going over with him as well. And we're just so excited. We go there at least twice a year and we love it there. And we used to go to the villa. And we used to go to the villa, to the synagogue every week there. And Rabbi Levy.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's been amazing, absolutely amazing.
Well, you got to send me
and the Sefer Torah is dedicated to the Sheikh Mohammed.
Yes.
And the covers in Arabic. It's just amazing.
Well, you got to send me an invitation to the bar mitzvah, okay?
Okay, definitely. Tanya, I don't know whether I've never seen. We haven't. Do you know my daughter Tanya?
The name is very familiar.
Tanya's a man. Yeah.
I have to tell you honestly, I meet many people, but I'm excited for your grandson's.
Yeah, I know, we're excited too. Okay, thank you. Lovely, very interesting talk. Bye.
Actually, before we go on to the next one, Rabbi Sarna, I met Aryeh Wagner a couple of days ago, who's a caterer in London. I believe he's been at the Sheraton for the last 20 years in London, but he's been invited across to Dubai for weddings there. You'd think they'd find a caterer slightly closer
Oh, come on, but he's very good. He's very good.
Do they have plenty of kosher food there?
Yeah, now I think there's about 5 kosher restaurants that have opened.
Ah, okay, fine.
Still waiting for Daniel's Bakery. Is that what it's called? What's the famous bakery?
Yeah, Daniel's from Temple Fortune, yeah. We'll go to Sue Neal, if you'd like to unmute yourself. Sue, if you're there, please unmute yourself.
Oh,
Right, it's Mike, not Sue.
Yeah, hi. Sorry about that. Rabbi, it's Mike Neal here. Fabulous talk, really interesting. So far as your call is concerned, what is the attitude of the locals there to the Accord? Have you met many people?
Yes, I have met many people. Though the truth is, the people that I'm meeting are not necessarily representative. You know, I'm meeting the people who are very eager to engage. That's why I say I think it's, you know, about 10% who are very eager, 10% who are very hesitant, and about 80% who are waiting and seeing.
What about reciprocal arrangements to coming to Israel? Are they coming?
Not the same. It's not the same.
same.
In fact, I was speaking to one of the big hotel families in Dubai, and he said he had many Israeli friends before the Abraham Accords were signed. And but as soon as the Accords were signed, he said his Israeli friends were saying to him, "Rashid, you just wait. We are going to come to your country and we are going to make so much money off of you guys. We're going to come with our startup companies and you guys are going to invest. We'll make some money for you. Don't worry, but we're going to make some." And he said in December, he called his friend, he put his iPhone on, you know, and he was filming all of the Israelis who were packed into his lobby. He says, "Who's making money now?" He's like, all of your tourists are coming here. Your hotel's full. So I say that because it's not necessarily intuitive, but in fact, you know, many Israelis have gone to the UAE. Not many Emiratis have gone to Israel yet.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Not
Very
yet.
interesting.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Not yet. You know, the same kind of phenomenon. And in fact, if Emiratis do go to Israel, and they dress like Emiratis, which are distinct from, let's say, Palestinian dress, etc., they might face some opposition, not so much from Jewish Israelis, but actually from Palestinians.
Yeah.
It's not
So
Palestinian holy sites. Islamic holy sites. So
they have their own problems. I appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Back to you, Dave.
Jackie Ovitz, if you're there, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hello?
There we are, you're on.
You're on.
Yes. Good evening, Rabbi Sarna. We are the parents of Eli Ovitz, and yes, 2 weeks ago,
wow.
and 2 weeks ago he was there.
He was there.
Yeah, he was there for Moed Pesach, and that's his second time in Dubai. And we told him we were watching your program, and he sends his best regards.
Wonderful.
Yes.
He could have zoomed in today.
He could have done, yeah. Anyway, thank you for all the good work you're doing there.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you. We'll go to Laura Frank, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yes, I will try and unmute myself.
There you are, we can hear you.
Oh, have I? Oh, thank you. Good evening, Rabbi San. Thank you very much indeed. I'm speaking from actually Jerusalem, from Israel. I'm a member of Edgeware United Synagogue and I miss it very much at the moment. But my question to you is, and Dubai and the United Arab Emirates sounds the most attractive place to go to. And I understand that so many people are going. How do you feel about the fact that it's obviously diverting by its attraction, is diverting tourism to Israel. And Israel, you know, in light of the corona, everybody has suffered. All over the world we've suffered. But Israel's special to us. And I get worried because I know a lot of friends who've gone. Good luck to them. It's wonderful. And they've had a marvelous time. And thank you for the work you're doing. But it worries me a little bit. I think we really should be supporting Israel now. I don't know. What do you feel about my question? We shouldn't be.
I think that we are. I don't think it's an either or. I think there are actually many people who are visiting Israel and both. You know, it's a 3-hour flight. So, and people are excited about it. So, if anything, I don't think we're going to see any decline in Israeli tourism. I think, if anything, Israelis, businesses particularly, are excited that there is. It's the nearest major airport hub for Israel. Ben Gurion is not a major hub. No one connects through Ben Gurion. Now access directly from, because think about it, the only other place that was somewhat close to it was the next nearest was Istanbul, right? So this is really it's a think Turkey, right? Think Turkey 10 years ago. Think Turkey pre-flotilla, right? Pre-Erdogan's kind of ascension to a hard power, through hard power, right? You had hundreds of thousands of Israelis all over Turkey.
No.
That's basically finished. So now it's Dubai. Now it's the UAE.
We look at it that way. Thank you.
I see that the time has come. I just wanted to say, what a great pleasure to be with you today. I'm so grateful to Rabbi Lister, to David and David. It's really special for me to be here with you. I hope at some point to visit in person. But until that point, perhaps Nitra'eh be'Yehuda Marriott. Maybe we'll see each other in the United Arab Emirates. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for joining us. I wish you well in both in New York and in the Middle East as well.
Thank you, Chief Rabbi. And considering you said to me, well, 15 minutes enough to talk, and then we can ask the questions. So you went slightly over time.
It's occupational hazard. At this point, that's the way it goes. All right, friends. Very good to see you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody who has joined us this evening. For those people who may have wanted to ask questions or written questions, unfortunately, as I explained at the beginning, Rabbi Sarna is in New York, and he had to cut off at 4 o'clock there, which is 9 o'clock here. He has a meeting to go to. Thankfully, he joined us at 8 o'clock. He had assured us that he couldn't get to us before 8:15 today. So we did have an hour with him. So we thank him for that. I thank you all for being with us this evening.